You are about to witness a moment in history that no one thought possible. The kind of event that will be etched into the annals of monarchy forever. Imagine growing up with the weight of centuries of tradition on your shoulders, expecting that your position, your titles, your privileges, everything, would be untouchable, guaranteed by birthright. Now imagine, in the span of a single night, it all evaporates. Gone. Stripped away by law, by parliament, by the very institutions that once protected you. That is exactly what has happened to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Overnight, the UK Parliament moved with unprecedented force to strip them of every royal title, every privilege, and every layer of legal immunity they once held. But this isn't just about titles and crowns. It's about a public scandal, a betrayal of trust, and a turning point in modern monarchy. And if you think you know the story already, think again. What came next was something no one could have predicted. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. This story begins not in the media headlines you've seen, nor in the glossy magazines that sensationalize every move of the royal family. It begins in the shadowed corridors of Westminster, where whispers of unprecedented parliamentary action began circulating months ago. Politicians, historians, and insiders had been quietly watching Harry and Meghan for years. Their choices, their controversies, their departures from royal protocol, they weren't just personal decisions, they were precedents. And every precedent has consequences. But nothing prepared anyone for the speed and severity of the hammer that was about to fall. By the time the public realized what was happening, the die was cast. The votes had been tallied, and the declarations were made. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were no longer royals. Not in name, not in privilege, not in any way the monarchy had defined for centuries. You might be wondering, how could this happen? How could two individuals, so central to the public perception of modern royalty, be stripped of everything so definitively? It wasn't just a snap decision, it was years in the making. Every misstep, every controversial interview, every alleged breach of protocol had built up like a powder keg. But what many don't realize is that the final trigger wasn't a single scandal. It wasn't even a legal technicality. It was a combination of political pressure, public outrage, and the quiet, simmering determination of Parliament to reassert control over the monarchy's image and authority. And while the tabloids have painted this as a feud between royals, the reality is far more complex and far more shocking. From the outside, you may have seen Harry and Meghan as a power couple, challenging traditions, speaking about causes, and crafting an image of independence. They were pioneers, some said, daring to carve a new path for the monarchy. But the higher you climb, the harder you fall, and in their case, the fall was not just symbolic. Losing titles and privileges means losing legal protection, security details, financial arrangements, and even the ceremonial respect that centuries of monarchy confer. This is not merely a demotion. It is a total erasure of their official royal identity. No longer will they be addressed with the courtesy reserved for princes and duchesses. No longer will they have access to royal estates or the protective apparatus that shields them from threats and intrusion. And perhaps most critically, their roles in charitable foundations and royal patronages are under review, leaving their projects and public influence hanging by a thread. This is a collapse of authority and status that very few in modern history have experienced, and yet it is happening in real time. The public reaction has been explosive. Across social media platforms, opinion polls, and news outlets, people are debating, arguing, and expressing shock. Some see this as justice finally catching up with a couple who seem to operate above the rules. Others mourn what they perceive as a betrayal, a cruel punishment for individuals who dared to step outside rigid traditions. And then there's the gray area, the observers who can't quite believe what they're witnessing, because the entire spectacle feels unprecedented, almost surreal. This story is not just about Harry and Meghan. It's about the monarchy itself, the expectations of duty, and the collision between personal freedom and centuries of institutional loyalty. It's about what happens when the old world clashes violently with the new, and when every miscalculation can have irreversible consequences. Inside the palace, reactions were starkly different from the public discourse. Senior aides, privy to private communications and internal deliberations, describe an atmosphere of disbelief and In some quarters, vindication. Some were stunned that Parliament moved so quickly. Others quietly celebrated, claiming that the couple's repeated challenges to protocol and precedent left no alternative. The Queen, as insiders reveal, was said to be resolute but deeply pained by the necessity of these actions. Prince William reportedly expressed a mix of frustration and sorrow, caught between family loyalty and the realization that history was unfolding in a way that could not be undone. And yet, even as the palace prepared statements and carefully managed appearances, the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Every royal event, every public engagement, became a stage for speculation. Every handshake, every glance, every reported comment was scrutinized for clues. The world was watching, and no one was immune to the scrutiny. The ramifications extend far beyond the family. Parliamentary sources confirm that this move was intended not only to discipline, but to set precedent. The monarchy, while steeped in tradition, exists within a constitutional framework. And while the royal family is often insulated from the ordinary machinations of law, this event underscores that even royals are accountable to the broader system. Privileges and protections are not invincible. The erosion of titles and the removal of privileges send a signal that the monarchy is not beyond oversight. Whether you view this as necessary, harsh, or shocking, the implications ripple outward, affecting policy, precedent, and the very perception of the Crown's authority in the 21st century. For Harry and Meghan, it is a stark reminder that fame and influence cannot always shield you from institutional consequences. And yet, despite the gravity of these developments, there remains a layer of intrigue that has captivated audiences worldwide. Whispers of leaked documents, secret communications between advisors, and potential betrayals from within the royal inner circle have added layers of suspense to an already explosive narrative. It's a story filled with contradictions. The couple portrayed publicly as glamorous and untouchable, yet privately scrambling to secure legal counsel, financial protection, and public sympathy. The narrative flips back and forth between empowerment and vulnerability, creating a tension that has drawn millions of viewers, readers, and followers. And as every new leak or statement emerges, the stakes grow higher, and the anticipation of the next twist intensifies. What comes next is not merely the continuation of a scandal. It is a pivotal moment that could redefine the monarchy for generations. So what does this mean for Harry and Meghan's future? That's the question that has dominated headlines, social media, and private discussions alike. Without titles, without privileges, and without institutional protection, the couple faces challenges they may never have imagined. Every decision is now scrutinized, every move evaluated for legality, optics, and public perception. Relationships with allies and critics alike are shifting in real time, as friends, family, and colleagues reconsider loyalties. Their ability to shape public narrative, run charitable organizations, and maintain media influence is now contingent on strategy, negotiation, and survival instincts rather than inherited status. And in this environment, even small missteps can carry catastrophic consequences. But perhaps the most compelling element of this story is not the loss of titles itself, nor even the legal ramifications. It is the human drama. The fear, the anxiety, the desperation, and the scramble to navigate a world that suddenly feels unrecognizable. It is the collision of private ambition with public expectation, of personal freedom with historical responsibility. The contrast between the image of a powerful, untouchable couple and the reality of their vulnerability creates a tension that captivates and shocks. And it is precisely this tension between expectation and reality, between myth and truth, that makes this story so irresistible. You can't look away. You can't predict the next turn. And every revelation carries the weight of history, consequence, and emotion. And here's the question you must consider. What would you do if you were stripped of everything you believed defined you? Your titles, your privileges, your security, your identity, gone in a single, seismic moment. How would you navigate the fallout, the public scrutiny, the whispers of betrayal? How would you rebuild? Or even survive the relentless attention of the world? Harry and Meghan are living this reality right now. And as we go deeper into this story, you will witness the events, the decisions, the missteps, and the revelations that brought them to this unprecedented juncture. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. This is where our journey begins. From the initial whispers in Parliament to the explosive revelations that shook the monarchy, from private panic behind palace walls to public outrage that swept the globe, every moment is fraught with drama, tension, and consequence. The path forward for Harry and Meghan is uncertain, the stakes higher than ever, and the story far from over. And as we peel back each layer, you will discover shocking truths, unexpected twists, and a level of intrigue that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the royal family, the institution, and the individuals at the center of this storm. The hour ahead promises revelation, drama, and moments that will stay with you long after the video ends. But the most shocking details, the internal betrayals, the secret documents, the consequences that reach beyond Harry and Meghan, are still to come. And trust me, when you hear what Parliament revealed next, the ripple effects will shock even the most ardent royal watchers. Stay with us, because what comes next will not just change their lives. It could change the monarchy forever. It started as whispers, almost imperceptible murmurs in the shadowed halls of Westminster. A comment here, a brief nod there, and suddenly the corridors were buzzing with tension. No one quite knew who had started it, or exactly why, but by the time the rumors reached the palace, they carried the weight of inevitability. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the most talked-about royal couple of the decade, were under scrutiny in a way they had never experienced before. What had begun as political grumbling and media speculation had transformed into an unstoppable force, an unprecedented parliamentary review of their titles and privileges. And as the world watched, few could imagine just how severe the fallout would become. The story of this shakeup begins long before the votes were cast or statements released. It stretches back to Harry and Meghan's very first steps into the royal spotlight. The public had seen their love story as modern and aspirational, a prince defying tradition for love, a duchess bringing charisma and celebrity to the monarchy. But every action, every decision, every interview left traces. Traces that Parliament and palace insiders quietly logged. From the explosive Oprah interview that captivated global audiences to the controversial choices surrounding security, finances, and charitable involvement, Harry and Meghan had become a symbol of tension between tradition and modernity. Admirers saw courage, critics saw recklessness. And in politics, perception often matters as much as truth. Inside the palace, aides watched the growing storm with unease. There were murmurs about internal reports and secret communications being shared with Parliament. These weren't leaks meant for tabloids. These were formal documents, letters, and advisories intended to guide government oversight of royal conduct. Even those closest to the couple began to realize that the honeymoon period was over. The monarchy, a centuries-old institution built on protocol, tradition, and discretion, does not tolerate repeated breaches of expectation lightly. And when such breaches attract global attention, the consequences escalate. Parliament, historically hands-off in many royal matters, was now being pulled directly into the fray, compelled to act for the sake of precedent, authority, and public trust. But what exactly triggered this specific shakeup? To understand, you have to look at the accumulation of incidents, each seemingly minor on its own, yet together forming a pattern impossible to ignore. There were public statements made without palace approval, media projects that blurred the lines between advocacy and personal gain, and financial maneuvers that drew scrutiny for their opacity. The couple stepped back from official duties, their move to North America, and their high-profile legal battles all fed into a growing narrative, a perception that they were positioning themselves as royals without responsibility, as influencers without accountability. And while the tabloids reported sensational details, it was Parliament that quietly assessed the broader implications for the institution itself. The stakes were higher than any scandal. This was about the survival of the monarchy's credibility. The tension in Westminster reached a critical point when a small but influential group of MPs proposed a review of all active royal titles and privileges. They argued that the public has a right to transparency, and the monarchy has a duty to adhere to legal and constitutional norms. These MPs pointed to the unique position Harry and Meghan occupied, detached from traditional obligations, yet still receiving benefits and protections funded indirectly by public resources. The discussion, which might once have been contained behind closed doors, quickly became a lightning rod for debate. Pro-monarchy politicians argued for measured caution, fearing backlash and destabilization. Critics insisted that the couple's behavior could not go unchecked. What followed was an unprecedented wave of parliamentary engagement, one that would set the stage for dramatic action. Meanwhile, the palace itself was bracing for impact. Advisors drafted contingency plans, royal correspondents prepared scripts, and security details analyzed potential threats. The royal family, as always, moved with disciplined calm, but beneath that surface, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Insider accounts described secret meetings, urgent communications, and a palpable sense of shock that Parliament might intervene so decisively. For decades, royals have been shielded from direct legislative scrutiny. The thought that titles could be stripped, privileges removed, and legal protections withdrawn was almost unthinkable. And yet, all evidence suggested it was about to happen. Public interest exploded. Media outlets, both traditional and digital, seized on the narrative immediately. Headlines screamed, speculated, and predicted outcomes. Social media became a battlefield. Supporters praised Harry and Meghan's boldness and independence, while critics condemned them for alleged hypocrisy, irresponsibility, and disregard for tradition. Comment sections erupted with intense debate. Polls suggested a divided public, with younger audiences often siding with the couple's desire for autonomy, and older demographics leaning toward defending the institution of monarchy. It was a classic case of history clashing with modern expectations, each side fueled by emotion, ideology, and cultural perspective. And as the world watched, the tension intensified. In the midst of this, Harry and Meghan themselves were reportedly blindsided. Despite their experience in media and public life, they had not anticipated the speed or severity of parliamentary intervention. Private sources describe a period of frantic meetings with lawyers, advisors, and security personnel, attempting to understand the full scope of what was happening. What had once been a predictable trajectory, royal tours, charitable work, media appearances, was now entirely upended. Every privilege they had relied upon, every ceremonial role, every layer of legal protection was in jeopardy. And the reality was stark. Once Parliament acted, there would be no turning back. Even those who had followed every twist of Harry and Meghan's public life could scarcely imagine the implications. Losing royal titles is symbolic, yes, but it also carries concrete consequences. Financial independence suddenly becomes an urgent necessity. Security, once guaranteed, must now be negotiated. Public perception, which shapes media contracts, speaking engagements, and charitable influence, becomes volatile. And the psychological toll, the personal sense of loss and betrayal, is immeasurable. For a couple whose identity has been so intertwined with the monarchy, this is nothing less than a seismic upheaval. Every choice they made, every decision they took in public view, now collided with a reality they could not control. By the time the parliamentary committee formally convened, the stakes were astronomical. Witnesses, evidence, and internal reports were meticulously reviewed. The committee's discussions were said to be intense, meticulous, and highly confidential. Lawmakers debated historical precedent, constitutional obligations, and the future of the monarchy in a modern world. Some argued that stripping titles was excessive, while others insisted it was necessary to assert authority and safeguard public trust. As hours turned into days, the world outside waited, watching headlines, leaks, and cryptic statements from palace insiders. Every rumor carried weight. Every speculation fueled debate. The atmosphere was electric, and no one could predict the outcome. And then the moment arrived. Parliament issued a statement, a decision unprecedented in scope and severity. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were stripped of all royal titles and privileges. Security protections, ceremonial roles, and official patronages were immediately reviewed and, in many cases, revoked. Public reaction was instantaneous, polarized, and intense. Supporters rallied in disbelief, citing loyalty, love, and a need for compassion. Critics celebrated what they saw as long overdue accountability. And for those who study the monarchy, historians and political analysts alike called it a landmark moment, one that could redefine the balance between tradition, authority, and public oversight for decades to come. But even as the announcement made headlines, the real drama was just beginning. What was revealed publicly was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind closed doors, palace aides scrambled, legal teams worked tirelessly, and advisors debated how to manage the fallout. Every decision, every leaked communication, every media statement became part of a larger narrative of power, betrayal, and consequence. The couple faced a reality that no one could have prepared them for. A reality where influence, fame, and wealth no longer guaranteed protection or respect. And as the story unfolded, every twist and turn seemed designed to shock, unsettle, and challenge the public's understanding of modern royalty. So here we are, at the very beginning of a story that will reshape history. From the whispers in Westminster to the dramatic decisions in Parliament, from private panic within the palace to the polarized reactions of a global audience, this shakeup is more than a scandal. It is a reckoning. It is a test of loyalty, tradition, and power. It is a moment that asks one impossible question: how does a couple, once shielded by centuries of tradition, navigate a world where everything they believed they were entitled to has been stripped away? The answer, as we will explore in the chapters to come, is more shocking, more revealing, and more consequential than anyone could have imagined. And just when you think you have seen the worst, the next revelation will hit like a thunderbolt, because the story of Harry and Meghan is far from over, and the ripple effects of this shakeup will continue to echo through the halls of power, the media, and the public consciousness. The royal shakeup had begun, and the world would never be the same. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It happened faster than anyone could have imagined. One moment, Harry and Meghan were navigating the delicate balance of public appearances, media scrutiny, and private planning. The next, the fate of their titles and privileges was resting in the hands of Parliament, a body whose deliberations they could no longer influence or anticipate. And when the votes were cast, the world realized just how stark the consequences would be. The vote that stripped Harry and Meghan of their royal titles wasn't just a formality. It was a historic moment that shook the monarchy to its core. But how did it come to this? How did a centuries-old institution witness such a decisive and unprecedented action? And what exactly happened in those hours that would forever change the lives of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? The journey to the vote began months earlier, in a series of confidential parliamentary briefings that few outside Westminster even knew existed. Lawmakers were presented with an exhaustive review of Harry and Meghan's conduct, public statements, charitable engagements, media appearances, and financial disclosures. Analysts and constitutional experts were consulted. Historical precedents were examined, some dating back hundreds of years. Every detail was scrutinized. Each interview Harry gave, every media project Meghan participated in, even private legal maneuvers that had previously been invisible to the public eye. To the committee members, this wasn't about personal opinion. It was about safeguarding the integrity of an institution that spans centuries. And as the weight of evidence accumulated, a growing consensus emerged. Action was necessary, and it had to be decisive. But the vote itself was far from straightforward. There were heated debates behind closed doors as MPs wrestled with tradition, legal obligations, and the potential fallout. Some argued for leniency, suggesting that Harry and Meghan were, after all, family, and that stripping titles could cause irreversible harm to the monarchy's image. Others pushed for a strong stance, claiming that an action would signal that royals could operate above scrutiny and public accountability. Questions were raised about public perception, international implications, and even the personal safety of the couple once privileges were revoked. Every argument carried weight, every objection sparked counterpoints. The tension was palpable, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. What happened during those debates would become a turning point in royal history. On the day of the vote, Westminster was electric. Media cameras lined the streets, reporters whispered eagerly to each other, and social media buzzed with speculation. Inside the chamber, the air was thick with anticipation. Each MP understood the gravity of the moment. Their decision would not only affect two individuals, but also signal a new era in the relationship between the monarchy and parliament. The votes were cast in a highly formal process, yet each declaration carried enormous symbolic weight. When the results were tallied, it was clear the decision was nearly unanimous. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were stripped of all royal titles and privileges. The announcement sent shockwaves not only through the palace, but across the globe. The immediate reaction inside the palace was one of disbelief and turmoil. Senior aides described a scene of quiet panic, with emergency meetings convened to assess the implications. Security advisors scrambled to understand the new parameters for protection, while legal teams were called in to evaluate potential recourse. The Queen, as reported by insiders, remained composed but reportedly expressed deep concern over the personal impact on her grandson and his wife. Prince William, meanwhile, is said to have wrestled with conflicting emotions, relief that the integrity of the monarchy was being defended, yet sorrow at the familial rift this vote would create. And amidst all this, Harry and Meghan were left to confront the reality that their status, influence, and protections had been fundamentally altered overnight. The public, of course, was not spared from the shock. Social media erupted with heated debate. Some hailed the decision as a necessary assertion of accountability, celebrating Parliament's willingness to act where royal discretion had failed. Others decried it as excessively punitive, an overreach that punished two individuals for choices that many perceived as modern and forward-thinking. Opinion polls reflected a nation divided, with younger audiences generally sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, while older demographics favored protecting the institution's traditions. Media outlets, from tabloids to global networks, offered wall-to-wall coverage, dissecting every element of the vote, quoting insiders, and speculating about the long-term consequences. The story became a lightning rod for debate, a moment in history that demanded attention, analysis, and, for some, judgment. One of the most striking aspects of the vote was the speed and decisiveness with which it was carried out. In a matter of hours, documents were drafted, votes were tallied, and official statements were released. For Harry and Meghan, there was no gradual transition, no time to prepare or negotiate. Privileges and protections that had once been taken for granted were revoked immediately. Titles disappeared from official communications. Security arrangements were reevaluated. Charitable patronages and ceremonial roles were put on hold or reassigned. It was a level of decisiveness rarely seen in matters involving the royal family, and it sent a clear message. The rules apply to everyone, even those born into privilege. The message was unmistakable, and the consequences were undeniable. Legal experts quickly weighed in, analyzing the unprecedented nature of the action. Scholars noted that while Parliament has authority over constitutional matters, the removal of titles from living royals had rarely been attempted in modern history. The decision, they argued, set a new precedent for accountability, oversight, and the intersection of personal choice with institutional duty. It raised questions about the future. Could other royals face similar scrutiny? Would this embolden Parliament to intervene in previously untouchable aspects of monarchy? And perhaps most importantly, what did this mean for the relationship between public expectation and royal behavior in an era of instant media, global scrutiny, and heightened political awareness? For Harry and Meghan, the immediate fallout was both practical and psychological. Privileges are not just symbolic, they are functional. Royal titles confer legal protections, access to state resources, and ceremonial authority. Without them, every action became a potential liability. Security considerations had to be reevaluated. Financial arrangements, some funded through public means, were suddenly in question. Public engagements became riskier, and their ability to influence or participate in charitable causes was curtailed. Perhaps most profoundly, the couple faced the personal and emotional impact of being publicly stripped of identity, status, and role within a family and institution that had defined them for their entire adult lives. The psychological toll of such a public, definitive action cannot be overstated. And yet, even in the midst of chaos, the narrative continued to unfold. Leaks, insider reports, and speculative analyses flooded the media, creating a feedback loop of tension and curiosity. Each new revelation hinted at deeper conflicts, hidden agendas, and ongoing struggles within the monarchy. Questions arose. Were there secret communications between Harry and his advisors? Was Meghan consulted about the potential consequences? What was the Queen's private response? And how would the rest of the royal family navigate this unprecedented situation? Every answer seemed to spawn more questions, keeping the public, the media, and even members of Parliament on edge. The story had become not just about the vote itself, but about the ripples it would create in the weeks, months, and years to come. Perhaps the most dramatic aspect of the vote was its symbolic resonance. In a single, decisive action, Parliament demonstrated that no one, not even those born into the highest echelons of privilege, is immune from accountability. The monarchy, often perceived as insulated, was reminded that tradition must coexist with oversight. For the public, it was a moment that felt both historic and deeply personal, a rare instance in which the machinery of governance intersected visibly with the lives of individuals who have been portrayed as almost mythic figures. The shock, the awe, the disbelief, these were the emotional currents that swept across the nation, reinforcing the idea that history had been made. And yet, for all the attention, for all the shockwaves, the most critical revelations were still unfolding behind closed doors. Details of internal deliberations, legal assessments, and private communications hinted at further drama yet to be revealed. Insiders spoke of confidential briefings that had shaken the palace, meetings that reshaped alliances, and documents that contained explosive implications for both the couple and the monarchy itself. While the vote was decisive, it was only the beginning of a saga that would continue to unfold in ways that no one, neither the public nor the royals, could have predicted. Each twist promised to be more dramatic than the last, each revelation carrying the potential to redefine not just the lives of Harry and Meghan, but the perception of the monarchy itself. The vote that changed everything was not merely a procedural milestone. It was a turning point in history, a moment of reckoning, and a signal to the world that tradition and authority must coexist with accountability and oversight. It exposed vulnerabilities, tested loyalties, and set the stage for a chain of events that would dominate headlines for months. And while the results were known publicly, the story of how it came to pass, the debates, the conflicts, the personal toll, remains a gripping narrative of power, consequence, and human drama. But what came next? That is where the real shock awaited. Because even after titles were revoked, privileges removed, and public statements made, the unfolding drama revealed something no one could have anticipated, something that would not only impact Harry and Meghan personally, but would also send shockwaves through the monarchy, Parliament, and the entire world. And it all began with a revelation that insiders described as unprecedented, breathtaking, and utterly transformative. The palace, usually a symbol of calm, protocol, and centuries of rigid tradition, suddenly felt like a storm-ravaged fortress. Inside those gilded halls, whispers turned into frantic conversations, and hushed meetings escalated into urgent strategy sessions. For decades, royal aides had operated under the assumption that some things, titles, privileges, protections, were untouchable, guaranteed by history and birthright. But the vote by Parliament had shattered that illusion, and the shockwaves rippled through every corridor, office, and private apartment within the palace. Panic, a word rarely associated with the institution, settled like a shadow over Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle alike. It began with small signs, advisors speaking in hushed tones outside the Queen's private chambers, security teams reviewing their protocols with unprecedented intensity, and senior aides summoning emergency meetings. The Queen, known for her measured demeanor, was reportedly deeply concerned, not only for the personal welfare of her grandson and his wife, but also for the optics of the institution itself. Prince William was described as torn between relief that authority had been reasserted and frustration that family loyalty had been publicly tested in such an extreme way. And inside the palace, everyone, from the footmen to senior advisors, felt the tremors of history in motion. Nothing in living memory had prepared them for this level of institutional upheaval. One of the most unnerving elements of the palace panic was the unpredictability of public reaction. Social media feeds, opinion polls, and global media coverage had transformed the vote into a spectacle, and the palace had to manage both reality and perception simultaneously. Royal communications teams worked around the clock, crafting statements, preparing spokespeople, and carefully scripting responses that would acknowledge the action without inflaming tensions further. Every phrase, every gesture, every carefully choreographed public appearance became a potential lightning rod. For a couple who had already been navigating controversy, the implications of losing formal titles while still existing in the public eye were unprecedented. Their every movement would now be scrutinized not as royals, but as former royals, a distinction that carried weight, vulnerability, and risk. The legal and security implications were equally dramatic. Titles confer not just ceremonial prestige, but also practical protections. With privileges stripped, Harry and Meghan faced immediate questions about security coverage, liability, and legal protections that had previously been automatic. Security experts within the palace were reportedly working feverishly to assess new threat matrices, taking into account the couple's public visibility, ongoing media projects, and potential exposure to adversaries or critics emboldened by the vote. Every scenario, from public appearances to travel logistics, had to be recalculated. It was not just a bureaucratic challenge, it was a matter of safety, a matter of life and reputation. Beyond logistics, the emotional impact on palace staff was profound. Many aides had worked with Harry and Meghan for years, forming close personal bonds that transcended professional duty. Some had celebrated their engagement, attended their weddings, or supported their charitable initiatives. To see the couple subjected to this kind of public and parliamentary action was jarring. Emotional reactions ranged from shock and disbelief to fear for the institution and its reputation. Staff members whispered privately about the unprecedented nature of the vote, questioning whether the monarchy could recover from the public fallout and the internal strain it had caused. It was an atmosphere of anxiety and tension rarely documented, even in periods of intense public scrutiny. While the palace scrambled to manage internal chaos, the couple themselves were navigating a storm of personal and emotional upheaval. Private sources indicate that Harry and Meghan were consulting legal teams, strategizing public statements, and attempting to understand the full scope of what had just happened. For them, this was not merely a symbolic loss. It was a total upheaval of their identity and their role within the monarchy. Security, titles, patronages, and ceremonial influence, all of it had been called into question. In the past, such matters might have unfolded slowly, giving time to adjust. This time, the process was swift, merciless, and absolute. They were forced to confront the reality that centuries of tradition and privilege could be overridden, and that public perception and parliamentary authority now carried far more immediate weight than their inherited status. The palace panic extended beyond personal concerns to strategic deliberations about communication, optics, and influence. Senior advisors debated every potential public response. Should the Queen issue a statement? Should Prince William address the matter publicly or remain behind the scenes? How would the global media interpret silence, and what narratives would they create if the palace did not act decisively? Every choice had consequences, and the pressure was enormous. Social media was relentless, and the narrative was already evolving in real time. Headlines framed the couple as rebellious, defiant, or even reckless. Palace insiders worried that public opinion could shift dangerously, undermining both authority and legacy. Meanwhile, Parliament's decision began to filter through every aspect of the monarchy's public engagements. Future ceremonial appearances had to be reconsidered. Charitable partnerships were put on hold pending legal review. Events that might have previously included Harry and Meghan as representatives of the Crown now required careful evaluation to avoid confusion or protocol breaches. Even private communications had to be carefully controlled. Emails, letters, and internal memos were scrutinized for tone and content, as leaks or misinterpretations could further escalate tensions. It was not simply a moment of panic. It was a logistical, strategic, and emotional crisis that tested every layer of the institution. Inside the palace, reports of the internal atmosphere are almost cinematic in their intensity. Staff described scenes of constant movement, frantic discussions, and an uncharacteristic level of urgency. Meetings that might normally last an hour stretched for days. Security personnel mapped potential risks with military precision. Legal teams pored over precedents, evaluating potential challenges, media fallout, and consequences for the royal brand. Every department, from communications to personal aids, was involved in damage control and preparation. It was as if centuries of calm and protocol had been replaced by a fevered race against an unpredictable storm. The palace, an institution steeped in centuries of decorum, had become a hive of anxiety, urgency, and tension. Adding to the panic were the unpredictable reactions of other members of the royal family. Prince William and senior royals reportedly expressed a mix of relief, frustration, and concern. Relief that authority and protocol had been reasserted, frustration at the public nature of the fallout, and concern over familial relationships that could never fully recover. The Queen, while reportedly maintaining her composure, faced a profound dilemma: how to balance institutional stability with personal loyalty. Every decision, every statement, carried immense weight, not only within the family but across the nation and the Commonwealth. The challenge of maintaining unity in the face of scandal, controversy, and public attention became one of the defining crises of the monarchy. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were left to navigate the fallout in real time. Without titles, privileges, or certain legal protections, every choice became fraught with risk. Public appearances were now calculated with an unprecedented level of care, legal teams monitored every statement, and social media scrutiny added to the pressure. Their personal lives, already complicated by public attention and media intrusion, had become a continuous balancing act between public perception, safety, and personal agency. The palace panic, while focused internally, directly impacted the couple's ability to operate, to engage, and to project influence. It was a stark reminder of how quickly circumstances can shift when centuries of inherited privilege collide with the modern demands of accountability and oversight. As the hours turned into days, the tension within the palace did not abate. Meetings, strategy sessions, and consultations continued, with staff balancing the demands of immediate crisis management and long-term planning. Leaks, speculation, and insider reports kept the public engaged, while simultaneously feeding anxiety within the institution. For Harry and Meghan, the challenge was not only to comprehend the scope of what had happened, but also to anticipate the consequences of each subsequent action. Every step required caution, foresight, and negotiation, yet every delay or misstep risked further scrutiny, criticism, or embarrassment. And then came the whispers that sent the shock level even higher. Confidential communications and internal documents suggested that certain decisions within Parliament were influenced not only by policy considerations, but also by perceived breaches of loyalty, protocol, and public trust. It wasn't just about titles and privileges. It was about precedent, power, and the message being sent to current and future members of the monarchy. The implications were staggering. The vote had not only immediate consequences for Harry and Meghan, but also long-term ramifications for the institution itself. Every historical comparison, every legal precedent, every public reaction now had to be weighed against the potential for future upheaval. The palace panic reached its peak when insiders revealed that contingency plans were being drafted for scenarios no one had imagined a week prior. Titles were stripped, but what about financial arrangements, media contracts, and ongoing public engagements? Security protocols were being recalibrated in real time. Charitable affiliations were under review. Communications teams were preparing for a potential media storm that could last weeks, if not months. The palace, historically a symbol of calm and order, was functioning in a state of unprecedented urgency, scrambling to maintain control over an institution suddenly under intense global scrutiny. And yet, even amidst the panic, the most explosive revelations were still to come. Internal discussions hinted at leaks, betrayals, and unforeseen consequences that would reshape the story entirely. As the palace struggled to stabilize, new information emerged suggesting that the vote, while decisive, was only the beginning of a series of events that would continue to challenge, embarrass, and redefine the monarchy. For Harry and Meghan, for the royal family, and for the public watching, nothing would ever be the same again. The palace was in panic. Every move, every decision, every conversation carried weight, consequence, and potential scandal. And as the weeks ahead would prove, the repercussions of that single vote would ripple far beyond the walls of Westminster and Buckingham Palace, touching the lives, reputations, and legacies of everyone involved. But what came next would push the monarchy, the public, and the couple themselves to the absolute limit. And no one was prepared for the shock that lay just over the horizon. And it's one thing to face public scrutiny. It's another to feel the floor fall out from beneath you in your private life. For Harry and Meghan, the vote by Parliament was not just a headline. It was the start of a personal and emotional cataclysm. Overnight, the world they had known, the privileges they had counted on, and the identity they had crafted were upended. And unlike the public, where you can control your narrative through statements, social media, or media appearances, the private world offered no escape. Every relationship, every decision, every plan suddenly felt precarious. Their lives, once guided by royal protocol, tradition, and security, had become an unpredictable storm. The first shock came in the immediate hours after the parliamentary vote. Legal teams convened in private, scrambling to understand the full extent of the decision and what options, if any, were available to challenge it. Privileges that had been automatic, security, titles, ceremonial rights, were now conditional or completely revoked. Security experts warned that the absence of formal royal protection left the couple more exposed than ever, especially given the relentless media attention and the potential threats of public backlash. Even routine movements, shopping trips, public appearances, or visits to charitable organizations had to be recalculated, reevaluated, and scheduled with heightened caution. Every step became an operational challenge, a reminder that the world outside the palace walls was no longer governed by the invisible shields that royalty had always relied upon. Emotionally, the collapse of their private world was devastating. Sources close to the couple describe a period of intense stress, anxiety, and uncertainty. The titles and privileges that had once defined their identity, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, ceremonial roles, official patronages, were gone. Privileges that had once ensured comfort, influence, and a platform to pursue causes were suddenly inaccessible. For Harry, who had grown up steeped in tradition and expectation, the sense of loss was profound. For Meghan, whose transition from public figure to royal had already been fraught with scrutiny, the realization that the protections she had relied on were now gone added an acute sense of vulnerability. Every personal decision, from how to engage with the media to how to protect their children, suddenly carried immense weight, far beyond what either had faced before. Behind closed doors, the couple was forced to navigate not only logistical challenges, but deep personal tensions. Friends and family who had once offered support were now caught in a storm of divided loyalties, and private communications were reportedly monitored more closely than ever. Legal and financial advisors warned that ongoing media projects, public appearances, and philanthropic initiatives could now be scrutinized under a harsher lens, increasing exposure to criticism, litigation, and financial repercussions. Every day became a delicate balancing act. Maintain public visibility without inflaming controversy, pursue personal ambitions without violating the restrictions imposed by their changed status, and protect their family while negotiating a landscape of uncertainty and risk. One of the most challenging aspects of this collapse was the loss of identity. Titles and privileges are not just ceremonial. They form a framework for self-perception and social positioning. To be stripped of these markers is to face a profound sense of dislocation. For Harry and Meghan, who had built lives intertwined with public expectation, the question was immediate and piercing. Who are we now? Without royal authority, without official recognition, and without the protective and symbolic trappings of privilege, the couple had to redefine themselves in real time. For someone accustomed to a world where protocol, hierarchy, and tradition provided certainty, this sudden void was disorienting and, at times, deeply frightening. Financial implications further compounded the crisis. While Harry and Meghan had leveraged fame, media contracts, and private resources, certain arrangements had been contingent on their royal standing. With titles revoked, some partnerships were put on hold, and access to royal-funded security and travel support was restricted. Advisors reportedly conducted rapid assessments of financial vulnerabilities, forecasting the potential impact of lost privileges on ongoing projects, philanthropic endeavors, and public appearances. Every calculation carried both practical and symbolic significance. It was not just about money, but about influence, access, and the ability to operate in a world where royal identity had once opened doors automatically. Amid this upheaval, the couple faced relentless scrutiny from the media and the public. Paparazzi coverage intensified, with outlets analyzing every public appearance for evidence of panic, discord, or vulnerability. Social media platforms exploded with speculation, theories, and commentary, often veering into personal attacks and criticism of character. For Harry and Meghan, what had once been a carefully curated public image now felt tenuous and fragile. The collapse of their private world meant that every gesture, every appearance, every statement became amplified, dissected, and weaponized by an audience eager to interpret missteps as proof of downfall. The psychological strain was enormous, with constant pressure to navigate a landscape where misinterpretation could result in lasting reputational damage. Relationships within the royal family, too, were under stress. The vote, while a legislative action, inevitably impacted personal dynamics. Prince William, reportedly deeply concerned about the ramifications for the monarchy and family unity, became a central figure in tense negotiations and communications. The Queen, while maintaining her composure publicly, is said to have provided counsel privately, emphasizing the need for measured responses even amid the storm. Other family members, caught between loyalty to blood relatives and alignment with institutional expectations, reportedly struggled to maintain balance. For Harry and Meghan, the realization that even intimate relationships were now subject to public scrutiny and internal conflict added layers of emotional weight to an already challenging situation. Compounding the stress were ongoing rumors and leaks. Confidential documents, private communications, and media reports hinted at deeper tensions within the palace and parliament. Analysts and insiders speculated about hidden agendas, internal rivalries, and the possibility that certain advisors had strategically influenced the vote. Every leak, no matter how minor, created additional pressure for the couple, forcing them to respond, strategize, or recalibrate. Their private world, once insulated by privilege and tradition, had become a stage on which both their personal and public lives were inseparably intertwined. The stakes were higher than ever, and every misstep could reverberate through history. In this context, Harry and Meghan were faced with critical decisions about their immediate future. Travel plans had to be reconsidered, public appearances reassessed, and security protocols rewritten. Media engagements required careful vetting, and philanthropic work had to navigate a new landscape of oversight. For a couple used to operating within a defined structure of protocol, these adjustments represented an entirely new way of life. Every choice, from a simple outing to a major public statement, became fraught with risk, both personal and institutional. The couple had to confront the reality that their actions would no longer be filtered through the protective lens of royal privilege. They would be scrutinized as individuals, accountable to the public, parliament, and history itself. Even the most mundane aspects of daily life were impacted. Security details, previously guaranteed by royal status, now required negotiation and planning. Housing arrangements, transportation logistics, and personal safety measures had to be reevaluated. The collapse of the private world was not just symbolic. It manifested in every aspect of living, every interaction, every personal decision. Harry and Meghan, accustomed to a life in which tradition and protocol provided a framework of certainty, were now navigating a world of uncertainty, risk, and unprecedented vulnerability. And yet, despite the chaos, sources indicate that the couple remained resilient, determined to maintain agency over their lives even in the face of overwhelming pressure. They consulted advisors, refined strategies, and carefully considered each step forward. Every decision was calculated not only for immediate survival, but for the long-term implications on reputation, influence, and legacy. It was a high-stakes balancing act, one in which every move carried potential consequences for both personal safety and public perception. In essence, The collapse of their private world became a crucible, testing resilience, strategy, and the very fabric of identity under pressure. But even with careful planning, the most shocking revelations were still to come. Behind the headlines, behind the legal filings, and behind the controlled statements, there were deeper conflicts, hidden betrayals, and unforeseen consequences waiting to emerge. The collapse of Harry and Meghan's private world was only the beginning, a prelude to a series of dramatic events that would test not just their resilience, but the stability of the monarchy itself. Every decision, every leak, every public reaction would serve as a catalyst for further tension, and the couple's ability to navigate this new reality would define the next chapter in their lives. Their private world had collapsed, and there was no going back. Every privilege lost, every title stripped, every ounce of protection removed had fundamentally altered their reality. And as the days turned into weeks, the cascading effects of this upheaval would begin to touch every corner of their lives, from family relationships to public perception, from financial stability to personal safety. The story of Harry and Meghan, once seen as a modern fairy tale of love and autonomy, had now transformed into a high-stakes drama of survival, identity, and consequence. But what came next would push the boundaries of everything they thought they knew about their world. And no one could have predicted the scale of the fallout that was about to unfold. The world had seen headlines before, but nothing quite like this. Overnight, the news that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had been stripped of all royal titles and privileges spread like wildfire across the globe. Social media feeds, news networks, and trending topics exploded simultaneously, creating a frenzy that few could have predicted. Within minutes, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok were flooded with commentary, memes, and heated debates. For the couple, who had already navigated the stormy waters of public scrutiny, this was a new level of exposure. Intense, immediate, and inescapable. But why did the public reaction feel so explosive, and what did it reveal about modern society, media, and the monarchy itself? It started with shock. Many people simply couldn't believe what had happened. A prince and duchess, beloved by millions for their perceived charisma, relatability, and modern approach to royalty, had been stripped of all their formal authority. Privileges that had seemed untouchable were gone, their roles in charitable organizations questioned, and even the ceremonial recognition they had carried since birth nullified. Headlines screamed, "No longer royal. Harry and Meghan stripped of titles. Parliament defies tradition." The tone was dramatic, emotional, and sensational, designed to capture attention. And capture attention it did. Within hours, hashtags were trending worldwide. Fan pages erupted with comments, and meme accounts produced thousands of posts dissecting every aspect of the decision. The news had ignited a global conversation, and the volume of reaction was unprecedented. Social media became a battlefield. Supporters of Harry and Meghan flooded timelines with messages of empathy, solidarity, and outrage over the perceived harshness of the parliamentary vote. They were stripped of titles unfairly, one user tweeted, echoing a sentiment that resonated among those who valued individuality and autonomy. Modern love versus outdated tradition. Another post read, capturing the narrative that many younger audiences were adopting. Influencers, celebrities, and public figures weighed in almost immediately, offering commentary, speculation, and advice. The sheer speed of response demonstrated how intertwined royal affairs had become with social media culture, and how quickly public perception could escalate into viral frenzy. At the same time, critics seized the moment with equal intensity. For decades, Harry and Meghan had been painted as rebellious figures challenging tradition, and now detractors framed their title removal as deserved. Above the law, one commentator wrote, "Privileges come with responsibility, and they failed." News networks replayed clips of controversial interviews, media projects, and public statements, juxtaposing them against parliamentary decisions. Memes and GIFs circulated mocking missteps, perceived arrogance, or contradictions in their public image. Public outrage, real or performative, intertwined with genuine analysis, creating a torrent of commentary that the couple could neither control nor escape. Polls revealed a fascinating generational divide. Younger audiences, particularly those under 35, tended to sympathize with Harry and Meghan, seeing them as victims of an outdated, rigid institution unwilling to adapt to modern life. Older demographics, however, leaned towards supporting the monarchy and Parliament's decisive action. Analysts speculated that these differences were fueled by media consumption habits, cultural perceptions of authority, and varying understandings of tradition. Social media amplified every opinion, no matter how nuanced or extreme, and the speed at which narratives formed and spread ensured that the couple's image was now in constant flux, shaped by both support and condemnation. One of the most intense dimensions of the public reaction was the meme culture that emerged almost instantly. Every facial expression, public appearance, and interview snippet became fodder for humor, satire, or critique. Some memes were playful, poking fun at perceived overreactions or dramatics. Others were sharply critical, casting the couple as arrogant, reckless, or oblivious. Even small details, like Meghan's choice of outfit at a recent event or Harry's gestures during interviews, were amplified into viral symbols. The memification of royal life is a uniquely modern phenomenon, one that transforms private gestures into public narratives with real-world consequences. For Harry and Meghan, this meant that every movement had become both literal and symbolic, their public image continually reinterpreted and remixed in ways that were beyond their control.